Renee Knake Jefferson of the University of Houston Law Center. She's the co-author of Shortlisted, Women in the Shadows of the Supreme Court. Professor Jefferson, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Help us put this into some context. You've been making the point that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was considered a moderate when she first joined the court, even though now we view her much more as a progressive.
That's exactly right. When she joined the court, she was viewed as a moderate choice for President Clinton. And I think that's a couple of lessons can be drawn from that. First, that may be a sign of just how conservative the Supreme Court has become. And also, perhaps, that sometimes the justice will surprise the president. The president may think he or she is going to decide cases in a certain way, but over time, the justice, of course, ultimately defines her own legacy.
What's your sense of Judge Amy Coney Barrett? What do you think that people who are first getting to know her now, or just getting to know her now for the first time, should know about her?
Well, we know a bit from her already because she went through confirmation hearings not that long ago. President Trump appointed her to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in 2017. And there she shared insights about her personal views and also the way she would decide cases as a judge. She was asked how her personal views, in particular her religion, might inform her judicial decision-making. And she made it very clear at that time that her personal viewpoints, she believed any judge's personal viewpoints, whether they go to religion or other issues, should not interfere with the decisions that they make applying the law. I imagine that she will be receiving many more questions along those lines in the coming days as she goes through the confirmation process again.
Let's put this in a little historical perspective. The last president who dramatically reshaped the judiciary, at least one of the more recent ones we should talk about, is President Jimmy Carter. Compare what happened during the Carter administration to what's happening now and what we can learn from that.
I think this is something about Carter's legacy that often goes unremembered, but it's really one of the most significant things he did. In fact, the judges that he put on the federal judiciary are still with us some 40 years later, although many have retired or passed away. In fact, Justice Ginsburg was one of those judges. He appointed her to the D.C. Court of Appeals in 1980. And here's what Carter did when he came into office. He signed an executive order establishing a special commission that was charged with diversifying the federal bench. He, of course, never had the opportunity to put a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, but he profoundly changed the face, quite literally, of the lower courts. In fact, by the time he left office after just his 4-year term, 41 women were federal judges. That's in contrast to a total of 10 that had been appointed by all presidents together before him. And so by making diversity a priority and also a qualification for becoming a member of the federal bench, he vastly increased the number of women and minorities who were serving in that role.
You were quoted in Politico magazine about Amy Coney Barrett saying that the country should not and need not rely upon one justice to preserve and secure the rights we hold dear. Elaborate on that.
I think that's a really important point to keep in mind at a time where so much seems to be hinging on the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And her loss is extraordinary for so many reasons. But it's also important to follow the lessons that she taught us in her powerful dissents. And one of those lessons is this: if the outcome of a decision by the majority of the Supreme Court does not uphold the rights that we want to preserve, or in fact, we want to chart out in the future, we have other alternatives. We can go to the legislature. That's what she advocated for in one of her most famous dissents in the Lilly Ledbetter case. And of course, we know that Congress went on to then follow her directive and pass the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. And so at this time where we are all grieving her loss and wondering what that means for the future of the court, we should keep in mind that as citizens of this country, we're empowered to also change our future by going out and voting. And who our local, state, and federal representatives matter now more than ever.
Before I let you go, Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham announced tonight the timetable for the confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Senator Graham says that the hearings will begin on October 12th with opening statements, and then the questioning will begin in earnest on October 13th. Are you expecting these hearings to bear more resemblance perhaps to confirmation hearings of the past? Or has the precedent changed, let's say, with the very intense confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh, including the testimony of Professor Christine Blasey Ford?
Well, I don't know that we can draw specifically from that as a way to predict. In fact, I think the most accurate prediction of how things are going to go for now Judge Barrett, as she may likely become Justice Barrett, is to look at how her confirmation hearings went previously for the lower court. In fact, I imagine that's part of why the president selected her, because she's certainly a known quantity. She's been vetted before. The other point I would just make is that this time frame is itself quite historic. We are having this appointment occur right at the final hour before an election happens. If it does get completed and the vote happens, that will be in record speed as well. So her nomination is certainly historic because she will become, if confirmed, the fifth woman on the U.S. Supreme Court, but also because of the timeliness of it.
Professor Renee Knake Jefferson of the University of Houston Law Center. Professor, I appreciate you making time for us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, we'll look ahead to the first presidential debate this week by looking back at some